Welcome to our celebration of all things Parkinson's during April, Parkinson's Awareness Month. And this month is chosen because April the 11th marks the anniversary of the birth of Dr. James Parkinson, who wrote originally the essay on the shaking palsy. And in this book, he described all the symptoms that you may be experiencing even today. And he was the first medico to put together the symptoms in a wonderfully empathetic and clinically correct format. He wrote the 66-page essay called The Essay on the Shaking Palsy. But let's go back a little bit. James Parkinson was the son of an apothecary, and he was born, lived and died in his home in 1 Hoxton Square, Shoreditch in London. As a child, he watched his father make medications and roll pills and roll potions. And it's from that experience that he described the pill rolling tremor that today our consultants write to our GPs and write to each other, describing that typical pill rolling tremor of Parkinson's. James Parkinson was very interesting as a GP because he only had 2 patients himself in his practice with the condition that he described. In addition to these 2 patients, he described 4 other people that he observed walking the streets of London. And in his essay, he described all the symptoms. He described the tremor. And in the tremor, he in fact made one of his only 2 inaccuracies about the condition. James Parkinson believed that everyone with this condition would demonstrate a tremor. And today we know that is not correct. 30% of people with Parkinson's will never experience a tremor. And in fact, tremor is the least responsive symptom to treatment even today. He also described the gait and the propensity to run, so that gaining speed and having shorter steps. He described the posture and being forward flexed. In fact, he described everything beautifully, and in respect to the man, he also put a lot of time and consideration into describing the non-motor symptoms, the things that perhaps irritate and frustrate you more today than the motor symptoms. He described sleep disturbances, constipation, pains and stiffness and rigidity. The one thing that he did get slightly wrong, but it was correct at his time of writing, was that he stated the intellect remains intact. And in 1817, when he wrote his publication, that was probably true, because a diagnosis of Parkinson's meant a very shortened life expectancy, and most people passed away prematurely because of immobility. Whereas now, with the introduction of many medications and good management and good self-care and good exercise habits, we know that people will live for many, many years and decades living with Parkinson's. So as we all age, and the impact of medications and aging, the intellect may not always remain intact as we get older with this condition. So James Parkinson was ahead of his time. In the last chapter of his book, he called on his fellow medicos and scientists to come to search for the cause of Parkinson's and the eventual cure. And sadly, and more frustratingly, even today, the cause of Parkinson's and something to stop the progression remains the holy grail of all the medical and scientific field. One of the interesting things James Parkinson also talked about, as I said, were the non-motor symptoms. And we now know that some of those non-motor symptoms, so sleep disturbances, depression, loss of sense of smell, and constipation, they often precede the motor symptoms. So some of you will be aware that you had all of those symptoms years and perhaps decades before you were able to be diagnosed with the condition. And the reason for that is that our medical colleagues have a criteria that they have to address in order to make a diagnosis. So we must be patient with science while it catches up with the rules and regulations, and we must be patient with the medical fraternity while their diagnostic procedures catch up on what you know and what you're living with. But suffice to say, James Parkinson was an amazing observer of people. He was an amazing political figure at his time, but more to the point, he wrote so beautifully and was such a clinician that his name is now muttered, said, sworn at by you every day when you acknowledge that you are living with Parkinson's.